The smell of antiseptic was my shroud and my home. It had become as intrinsic to my existence as the air I breathed, a pungent perfume clinging to my hair, my skin, the cheap fibers of the blue uniform that had become my second skin. To others, it was the smell of sterility, of contained disease. To me, it was the bittersweet aroma of the dream that had been stolen from me. Every swipe of the mop across the polished linoleum of the fifth-floor corridor of Central Hospital echoed what I should have been doing. Instead of wielding a scalpel, I wielded an aluminum handle. Instead of auscultating hearts, I listened to the squeak of my cleaning cartwheels. I was Dr. Anna Bergman, graduated with honors, top of my class, now reduced to an invisible shadow, ensuring that the real doctors didn't slip on spilled coffee. The irony was so caustic it sometimes burned my throat. If you enjoy this type of story, please subscribe to the channel and help us grow. I appreciate all your support. My territory, my unofficial domain, was the intensive care and long-term patients ward. This is where the most complex, the most desperate cases came to wait for a cure, for a miracle, or simply for the end. And this is where he was. Room 512, Marcus Schneider. To the world, a name synonymous with power, with digital innovation. A billionaire who built a cybersecurity empire from nothing. To the hospital staff, he was the patient in 512, a diagnosis in a chart, a body in a persistent vegetative state after a sudden and devastating neurological event. To me, he was a puzzle, a riddle that screamed in silence, and I, the cleaning lady, was the only one who seemed to be listening. For months, my routine was the same. I entered his room, the soft sound of my rubber slippers the only thing disturbing the rhythmic hum of the machines that kept him alive. The air there was different, charged with the stillness of a life in suspension. The room was luxurious, private, with a huge window overlooking the hospital gardens, but the opulence only accentuated the tragedy. He lay motionless in bed, the face that once commanded boardrooms now a passive mask, his eyes permanently closed. Specialists came and went. Famous names, luminaries in neurology, cardiology, internal medicine. They looked at the monitors, read the charts, shook their heads with an air of professional solemnity, and left behind only the echo of their expensive shoes and the tacit verdict of hopelessness. But I saw more, or perhaps because I didn't have the pressure of a diagnosis to defend or a reputation to uphold, I was free to observe. Truly. While I emptied the trash, I noticed how the afternoon light at a specific angle caused an almost imperceptible tremor in his left eyelid. While wiping down the windowsill, I noticed how his fingers, which everyone considered flaccid and unresponsive, would contract minutely when a bird sang louder in the oak tree outside. Once I accidentally knocked over a metal jar. The sharp, sudden sound didn't elicit the expected startle, but I saw with a clarity that made me catch my breath, a slight tension run through the muscle of his jaw. These were minuscule, millimeter-sized things that routine exams, the 30-second assessments by the nursing staff, would never register. They were inconsistencies, and in medicine, inconsistencies are key. I started carrying a small notebook in my uniform pocket. In it, I noted everything: the date, the time, the stimulus, the response. April 14th, 3:04 p.m. Change from direct sunlight to shade. Contraction of the right pupil, slower than the left, by approximately half a second. April 22nd, 8:17 a.m. Sound of the medication cart in the hallway. Slight flexion of the left little toe. May 3rd, 11:30 a.m. Smell of the new pine-based disinfectant. Change in respiratory pattern on the monitor, from 14 to 16 bpm for exactly 12 seconds. The doctors saw a plateau, a straight line of degeneration. I saw fluctuations, peaks and valleys of subtle neurological activity that didn't fit a dying brain. They fit a brain under attack, a brain desperately fighting to communicate through a storm. My nights were consumed by research. In my small apartment, surrounded by medical books I refused to sell, I delved into articles, case studies, rare disease forums. The official diagnosis was vague, a noxic brain injury of undetermined etiology, but it didn't make sense. The MRI showed inflammation, yes, but not the widespread necrosis that would be expected. The EEG was abnormally slow, but not flat. It was as if the brain's operating system was intact, but an aggressive virus was blocking all the programs, and that's when I found it. A handful of articles, mostly from Europe and Japan, describing an obscure condition, easily mistaken for vegetative states or acute psychiatric illnesses, autoimmune encephalitis. Specifically, a very rare form caused by antibodies attacking the GABA-B receptors in the brain. GABA receptors are like the brakes of the nervous system. They calm it, regulate it. If antibodies attacked these brakes, the result would be electrical chaos, a cytokine storm. The symptoms described in the articles were a mirror of my notes: fluctuations in consciousness, bizarre autonomic responses, subtle and involuntary movements, and most importantly, it was treatable. With aggressive immunotherapy, patients could recover. They could come back. The knowledge burned in me like a fever. I had the key. I was almost certain of it. But what could I do? Walk into the hospital director's office and say, "Excuse me, the fifth-floor janitor has a differential diagnosis for your billionaire patient that 10 of the country's best specialists couldn't find." I'd be ridiculed, humiliated, and undoubtedly fired. I'd lose my only access to Marcus, my only access to the environment that, despite everything, I still loved. Fear paralyzed me. Who was I to challenge established wisdom? A failed doctor, an outcast, the memory of Dr. Albright, my residency supervisor, still haunted me. I had questioned his diagnosis in an appendicitis case, suggesting a rare ovarian condition. He publicly humiliated me in front of the entire team. In the end, I was right, but my boldness cost me a recommendation. I was labeled difficult, insubordinate. No one wanted to hire a resident who didn't know her place. And now, my place was behind a cleaning cart. That Tuesday morning, the air on the 5th floor felt different. Thicker, heavier. A buzz of expensive suits and deep voices emanated from the main conference room. I knew what it was. The final meeting on the Schneider case. The family, the lawyers, and the Council of 10, as I'd nicknamed them in my mind. 10 brilliant minds gathered to sign a death sentence. My heart pounded against my ribs. I continued my work, pushing the mop with contained fury, my head down, my ears on high alert. The conference room door was ajar, and voices leaked into the sterile corridor. "All therapeutic avenues have been exhausted," said a voice I recognized as Dr. Behrens, a renowned neurologist with an ego the size of a whole hospital. "The scans are conclusive. The degeneration is progressive and irreversible." "And your opinion is unanimous?" asked another voice, sharper, less medical. Robert Adler, Marcus's right-hand man, the guardian of the empire. A man whose cold gaze seemed to calculate the cost-benefit of every breath. There was a murmur of agreement, a chorus of sentences. "Unfortunately, yes. There's nothing more to be done. It's just a matter of time and maintaining the patient's dignity." Maintaining dignity. The phrase hit me like a punch. Their dignity was to switch off the machines, close the book, declare the end of the game. But what about the dignity of fighting, the dignity of searching for an answer until the last second? My notebook in my pocket felt like a ton of bricks. My observations, my research, my conviction, were they nothing? The image of the tremor in Marcus's eyelid flashed in my mind, the twitch of his finger. They were signs, signs of a man trapped, screaming for help the only way he could, and they were simply going to let him drown. It was at that moment that something inside me broke. The fear, the humiliation, the years of feeling invisible, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, furious clarity. It wasn't about my ruined career or my wounded pride anymore. It was about a man being condemned to eternal silence because no one was willing to hear his whisper. My body moved before my mind could process the insanity of what I was about to do. I dropped the mop with a dull thud. I marched down the hallway, my rubber shoes making a determined sound on the linoleum. My hand, trembling only slightly, pushed open the heavy wooden door of the conference room. Silence was instantaneous and absolute. 10 pairs of eyes, plus those of Robert Adler and a lawyer I didn't recognize, turned to me. 10 faces radiating power, intelligence, and a barely concealed irritation at having their high-level meeting interrupted by the cleaning lady. I was in the center of the arena, the smell of bleach announcing my presence, my blue uniform a cry of inadequacy amidst their designer suits. Dr. Behrens was the first to speak, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yes, if you're looking for the restroom, it's at the end of the hall to the right." A few muffled laughs. I felt my face burn, but I kept my chin up. My gaze didn't fix on him, but swept the room, searching for a single crack in the wall of skepticism. Robert Adler leaned forward, his eyes like shards of ice. "What is the meaning of this? Who let you in here?" My voice came out surprisingly firm, cutting through the tense air. "My name is Anna Bergman." I paused, letting the name hang. I didn't add doctor, not yet. "I clean this floor, and I listen, and you are all wrong about Marcus Schneider." A shock rippled through the room, followed by a wave of disbelief and scorn. Behrens let out a short, cruel laugh. "Oh, really? The cleaning crew now offers second opinions? What's next? The cafeteria staff reading MRIs? He is not in a degenerative vegetative state," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, conviction overcoming fear. I addressed not Behrens, but the room as a whole. The signs are not consistent. There are fluctuations, subtle neurological responses to external stimuli that don't fit your diagnosis. "Neurological responses or random reflex spasms?" Behrens scoffed, turning to his colleagues. "I think we know the difference." "I know the difference between a brainstem reflex and a latent cortical response," I retorted, and the use of the correct terminology silenced them for a second. The surprise on their faces was a small glimpse of victory. I saw. "What exactly did you see?" Adler interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. "While emptying the trash?" "Exactly," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "While I emptied the trash, while I cleaned the window, while I spent more time in that room than any of you over the last 3 months, I saw a pattern suggesting an autoimmune storm, not brain death. I believe he has a rare form of limbic encephalitis, specifically anti-GABA B receptor antibody encephalitis. I pronounced the name of the disease with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just shock anymore. There was a touch of confusion, of disorientation. It was such a specific hypothesis, so outside their field of vision, that for a moment they didn't know how to react. Behrens recovered his composure first. "This is the height of absurdity. A fantasy pulled from some internet blog. Security," he yelled, looking towards the door. Adler raised his hand, silencing him. His gaze was still fixed on me, cold and calculating, but now there was something more. A spark of curiosity? Or perhaps he was just assessing the potential damage of a scandal. "Do you have any proof for this extraordinary theory? Or is this just the figment of someone's imagination who reads too many charts they shouldn't?" The question was a trap, a double-edged sword. But it was also a door, a small crack of light. My hand slipped into my uniform pocket, my fingers finding the worn cover of my notebook. Inside were my proofs, months of meticulous observation, my soul, my career, and Marcus Schneider's life, all contained within those squared pages. The weight of that small notebook was immense. "I have my notes," I said, my voice low but resonating in the quiet room. Everyone's eyes followed my hand as it rested on my pocket. The disdain was still there in the curve of Behrens' lips, in the rigid posture of the other doctors. Distrust was a wall on Adler's face, but amidst it all I noticed a different look, coming from Dr. Hartmann, an older man with greying hair, who until then had remained silent in the corner of the table. He wasn't smiling or scoffing. He was watching me with a quiet intensity, his head slightly tilted, like a scientist facing an unexpected anomaly. In that look, I didn't see mockery. I saw a question. And in that question, for the first time in a long time, I saw a chance. The hand on my pocket, on the notebook that was simultaneously my accusation and my defense, felt welded to my uniform. The conference room, once a pantheon of medical gods, had transformed into a courtroom. I was the sole witness, lawyer, and defendant all at once. Behrens' cry for security still echoed in the air, a testament to his outraged certainty. But Dr. Hartmann's gaze was a counterweight. It was the look of a true scientist, one who understands that the greatest barrier to knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion of certainty. "Wait," said Hartmann, his voice calm, but with a thread of authority that cut through Behrens's hysteria. He didn't address me, but Robert Adler. "One moment. Before we eject Mrs. Bergman from the premises, I'd like to understand. Did you take notes?" He finally looked at me. The question was simple, direct, a lifeline in an ocean of disdain. "Yes, doctor," I replied, my voice a little hoarse. "Daily. Show me." The order was gentle but unquestionable. Dr. Behrens snorted. "Franz, for God's sake, are you really going to humor this charade? She's a cleaning lady with delusions of grandeur." Hartmann turned slowly to Behrens, and for the first time I saw a glint of steel behind his gentle facade. "And you, Klaus, are a neurologist who has been signing a chart that says no changes for 3 months. If there's a 1 in a million chance that something has been overlooked, it's our duty, our sworn obligation to investigate. Now sit down and listen." Behrens recoiled as if he'd been slapped, his face red with anger and humiliation. Silence fell again, but this time it was an expectant silence. My hands trembling, I pulled the notebook from my pocket. It was a cheap thing, with a soft cardboard cover stained in places with cleaning products. It looked ridiculous on the polished mahogany surface of the conference table next to tablets and leather folders. I opened it. It all started with the pupils, I began, finding the first relevant entry. The chart describes a slow but symmetrical pupillary response, but that's only true under constant artificial light. I observed that in the late afternoon, when the sun shines directly through the window and is then blocked by the west wing of the building, the left pupil constricts visibly faster than the right, a transient anisocoria. It's not a brainstem reflex. It suggests dysfunction in higher pathways, possibly in the midbrain. I continued, turning the pages. My voice grew more confident with each sentence. I was no longer speaking as the cleaning lady. I was Dr. Bergman, presenting a case. Then the movements. You classified everything as myoclonus, post-anoxic spasms, but they're not random. There's a pattern. They respond to specific auditory stimuli, not to general noise, not to voices on television, but to specific high-frequency sounds. The song of a bird, the clinking of metal, and the human voice. When whispered, I paused and looked at them. Has anyone here tried whispering to Mr. Schneider? Silence was my answer. I have. And when I do, I observe a sustained contraction for 1 to 2 seconds of the extensor muscle of the little finger on his right hand. It's reproducible, and that's not myoclonus. I guided them through my weeks of observation. The change in respiratory rate in response to smells. How the texture of a new, rougher sheet seemed to cause a slight increase in the stiffness of his neck. These were details they, with their timed visits and their reliance on monitors, would never see. I was painting a portrait of a man who was present, not absent. All this, I concluded, closing the notebook, points to a state of paradoxical neuronal hyperexcitability. The brain is being bombarded by internal stimuli, its own antibodies, and its responses to the external world are fragmented, distorted. Anti-GABA B receptor antibody encephalitis would explain each of these anomalies. The inflammation they saw on the resonance, the slow EEG, and most importantly, it would give us a path forward. Robert Adler, who had listened to everything with predatory stillness, finally spoke. A path? And what would that be? A blood test, I replied, and a cerebrospinal fluid analysis to look for the specific antibody. If it's there, we can start immunotherapy, plasmapheresis, immunoglobulins, corticosteroids. We can stop the attack. Klaus Behrens exploded. This is madness. This test isn't even standard. It takes weeks. We have to send it to a specialized lab in Munich because of the fantasy of a keen observer. Hartmann finished calmly. He stood up and took my notebook, leafing through it with a respect that made my eyes burn. The logic is sound. The hypothesis, although remote, fits the presented facts better than ours, and the risk of testing is zero. The risk of not testing. He let the sentence die in the air. He looked at Adler. Mr. Adler, the final decision is yours together with the family. But my medical recommendation from this moment on is that we request the test for the anti-GABAB antibody immediately. Let's rule out all possibilities. Adler looked from Hartmann to me, his face an indecipherable mask. He was calculating the probabilities, the costs, the potential humiliation against the minuscule possibility of a miracle. For a long moment I thought he was going to laugh and send me away. Instead, he slowly nodded his head once. Do the test. The days that followed were purgatory. I was informed by a hospital administrator, dryly, to suspend my cleaning duties until further notice. I wasn't fired, but I was in limbo, hovering between invisibility and unwanted notoriety. Nurses and other staff looked at me sideways in the hallways. I was the cleaning lady who thinks she's a doctor, an anecdote, a cautionary tale. I spent most of my time in my apartment, rereading the articles, tormented by doubt. What if I was wrong? What if it was all coincidence? My mind desperately searching for patterns where none existed. The weight of what I'd done, of the hope I'd instilled, threatened to crush me. On the third day, my phone rang. It was Dr. Hartmann. Anna, he said, and the use of my first name surprised me. Mr. Adler agrees you should be here. Your insight may be helpful. Please come to the hospital. You can stay in Mr. Schneider's room if you like. Just observe. It was an extraordinary concession. I returned to the 5th floor, not in a blue uniform, but in my own clothes. I felt strange, exposed. I entered room 512. The only difference was an extra chair beside the bed, placed there for me. I sat down, and the silence of the room felt different. It was no longer the silence of waiting for the end, but the silence of anticipation. I spent hours there. I talked to him, not like the nurses with their cheerful professional phrases. I spoke to him as a person. I told him about the meeting, about my theory, about the test that was on its way. "Marcus," I whispered, leaning close, my instinct telling me to use the tone I'd recorded in my notes. "I know you're there. They don't believe me. Some of them think I'm crazy. But I see you. If you can hear me, if there's any part of you that can fight, you need to show me, you need to show them." I took his right hand. It was warm but limp, the skin dry. "Anything, Marcus. A small sign." I closed my eyes, focusing all my energy, all my hope, on the point of contact between my skin and his. And then, it happened. It was almost nothing. A tremor, a butterfly's wing beat under his skin in his little finger, so subtle I thought I'd imagined it. But then, I felt it again. A weak, voluntary pressure against my palm. My heart leaped. I gasped, my eyes snapping open. I looked at his hand, then at his serene face. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Did you do that?" Nothing. My mind raced. Had it been a spasm? Had it been my own imagination? No, it was different. It had intention. I stood up and ran for the door, nearly colliding with a nurse. "Call Dr. Hartman and Dr. Behrens. Now, tell them to come to room 512. It's urgent." The nurse looked at me with alarm and suspicion, but something in my voice made her obey. Minutes later, Hartman and Behrens entered the room, the former with an expression of curious concern, the latter with an air of boredom and irritation. "What's going on now, Mrs. Bergman?" Behrens asked. "Did he have a seizure?" "No," I replied, my voice tight. He responded. Behrens rolled his eyes. "We've been through this. Reflex spasms." "It wasn't a reflex," I insisted, turning to Hartman. "Doctor, please, look." I approached the bed again, adrenaline coursing through my veins, my future, my credibility, everything hinged on this moment. I took Marcus's hand again. "Marcus," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "They're here. They need to see. Please do it again. Squeeze my hand." The world seemed to stop. The two doctors watched, their gazes fixed on our joined hands. The hum of the heart rate monitor was the only sound. 1 second. 2, 5. "Doctor." Behrens' face began to form a sneer. My heart sank. I had imagined it. I had ruined everything. And then, under everyone's gaze, Marcus's little finger twitched. Then the ring finger. Slowly, weakly, but unmistakably, his hand closed around mine. It wasn't a spasm. It was a squeeze. Dr. Behrens' jaw dropped. He took a step forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. Dr. Hartman let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked at me, and on his face was awestruck wonder. "My God," he whispered. "My God, you were right." Marcus's handshake changed everything. The atmosphere in the hospital transformed overnight. I was no longer a curiosity, but a prophetess. The nurses looked at me with admiration. Dr. Behrens avoided me, his face a mask of resentment and wounded pride. The test was still pending, but the living proof, Marcus's response, was irrefutable. The next morning, Dr. Hartman found me by the window of Marcus's room. He held a tablet, and on his face was a tired but triumphant smile. "It's arrived," he said simply, "from the lab in Munich. They expedited the process." I held my breath. "Positive," he said. "High titers of antibodies against the GABA B receptor in the serum and cerebrospinal fluid. The diagnosis is confirmed." He looked at me, and for the first time, he used the title I so longed to hear again. "You were right, Dr. Bergman. You saved this man." The tears I had held back for so long finally came. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a joy so overwhelming it bowed me. Hartman placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Let's start treatment immediately. I've assembled the team." The second meeting in the conference room was a mirror image of the first. This time I was seated at the table, beside Hartman. My notebook was in front of me, not as an indictment, but as the founding text of our plan. Hartman outlined the aggressive immunotherapy protocol. Behrens was present, silent, his role reduced to that of a reluctant observer. Robert Adler was also there, his cold face now showing reluctant respect. The door opened and a young woman entered. She was tall, with the same bone structure as Marcus, and eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and fire. It was Lena, Marcus's daughter. She ignored all the doctors and came straight to me. "Are you Anna Bergman?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. I nodded, unable to speak. She grasped my hands, her eyes overflowing with tears. "Dr. Hartman told me. Everything. What you did. How you saw." Her voice trailed off. "Thank you. All those famous men with their degrees and their arrogance, they gave up on him. They only saw machines and graphs. You were the only one who truly saw my father. She turned to Adler and Hartmann. I want her to be part of the official team, not as a consultant or an observer, as one of his doctors, with full access and authority to make decisions alongside Dr. Hartmann. This is what my father would have wanted. Adler looked at Hartmann, who nodded vigorously. That goes without saying, Lena, Hartmann said. Dr. Bergman is leading this case with us. And so my exile ended. I was reinstated, not just as a doctor, but as the central figure in the most important treatment of my life. The following weeks were a whirlwind of hard work and gradual miracles. The immunotherapy was aggressive, and Marcus's recovery was slow, a steep climb out of a deep abyss. I was there every step of the way. I was there when his eyes opened and focused for the first time. I was there when he whispered his first word, Lena. And I was there the day he, with my help and that of a physical therapist, stood on his feet for the first time in almost a year. I saw the man return. The brilliant mind, the sharp intellect returned to the surface, but something was different. The ordeal had softened him, stripped away a layer of corporate arrogance, and exposed a core of vulnerability and gratitude he may not have even known he possessed. 3 months after my intervention in the conference room, I was again in a meeting room, but this time it was the Schneider Security Headquarters. I wore a professional blazer, not a cleaning uniform, and at the head of the table, looking thinner but with an undeniable presence, sat Marcus Schneider. He had summoned the board of directors, Robert Adler, Lena, Dr. Hartmann, and me. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice strong and clear. You all know that I came back from a place from which few return. The reports say it was thanks to cutting-edge medical treatment, and that's true, but it's not the whole truth. He turned to me. His gaze was intense, filled with an emotion that made my heart race. The truth is, I'm here because of this woman, Dr. Anna Bergman. When the world's experts had given up, when I was just a body in a bed, a depreciated asset on the balance sheet, this woman, who at the time was working in this same hospital as a cleaner, because of the rigidity and lack of vision of our medical system, had the courage, brilliance, and humanity to see what no one else saw. He picked up a document from the table. I recognized the termination form the hospital administration had given me during my limbo. Adler had recovered it for Marcus. Slowly, methodically, Marcus tore the paper into small pieces and dropped them in the trash. Your dismissal is cancelled, he said with a slight smile. In fact, I'd like to offer you a new position. I realized in that silence that building firewalls to protect data is important, but building bridges to save people is a lifetime's work. He looked at Lena and Hartmann, then at me. Together, we will create the Schneider Foundation for Rare Neuroimmune Diseases and the advancement of medical opportunities. Its purpose will be twofold: to fund cutting-edge research into these obscure diseases and, equally important, to identify and support brilliant minds like Dr. Bergman's, people the system ignored or discarded, and of course the foundation will need someone to lead it. He extended his hand across the table. Dr. Bergman, Anna, will you accept being the first director of our foundation? The room was silent. I looked at his outstretched hand, at Lena's hopeful face, at Hartmann's proud smile. The cycle was complete. The invisible shadow with a mop had become the leader of an institution dedicated to ensuring that no one else would have to scream in a silence no one was willing to hear. My dream hadn't been stolen. It had just taken a long and painful detour, leading me exactly where I needed to be. Yes, I said, my voice firm, my handshake strong. Yes, Marcus, I accept.